Reddit is joining the S&P, and I still think the market misunderstands the company. So it's been announced that Reddit is going to be in the inclusion of the S&P. And if you followed me for any length of time, you already know that I am bullish on this company for several different reasons. But here's the important part. My Reddit thesis is not that the stock is going to end up in the S&P. But this is a catalyst, and it's definitely a headline right now. Today, I want to talk about why Reddit is one of the more interesting growth companies in the market, and why the S&P 500 inclusion matters, and why I think the market is still misunderstanding the business, and also the biggest thing that could prove me wrong. Because there is definitely a bear case here. So let's start with the news. Reddit is being added to the S&P. Like I said, they announced this yesterday. And this isn't just like a ceremonial thing where Reddit gets to say, oh, hey, we're in the S&P 500 now. There is an actual mechanical impact to this. JP Morgan estimates that funds tracking the S&P 500 could need to buy around 16.7 million Reddit shares to bring their portfolios in line with the index. For perspective, Reuters says Reddit has averaged roughly 6 million shares of daily trading volume since its IPO. So that gives you some context to why this inclusion is a catalyst. Potentially, we're talking about a required index buying equal to almost 3 times the normal daily volume of shares. And then, of course, if you've been following Reddit at all, you know it has 19.2 million shares that are sold short as of July 31st, which represents about 13.6% of the stock. And now, I don't invest in companies because I think there's going to be a short squeeze. That is never really a thesis for me. But we do have to take this into consideration, because when you combine a relatively high short interest with a very large amount of forced index buying, you can see and understand why Reddit could have some very interesting price action in the short term. Well, obviously, that's just the short term, and I'm a long-term investor, so let's get into the long story. Because Reddit just put up one of those earnings reports. You look at the numbers and wonder why the conversation around the company is so negative. It doesn't combine. In the second quarter, Reddit generated $805 million in revenue, and that was up 61% year over year. And what's even more amazing is that this was Reddit's eighth consecutive quarter revenue growth of above 60%. Like, how many companies can say that? Advertising revenue grew 64%, which is crazy, to $762 million. International revenue grew 84%. Net income reached $253 million. Adjusted EBITDA hit $343 million, more than doubling from the year before. Free cash flow was $261 million. And gross margin, this is the craziest number to me in my opinion, was 91.3%. Their gross margin was 91.3%. That's wild. And that's one of the numbers that really catches my attention, because Reddit is increasingly looking like an extraordinarily scalable business. Once the infrastructure exists and the communities exist and the content exists, the incremental economics can become extremely attractive. And we are already starting to see the operating leverage that is happening with this company. Because a year ago, Reddit's adjusted EBITDA margin was about 33%. This quarter, it was almost 43%. Net margin was over 31%, revenue grew 61%, and net income grew 183%. And that is exactly what you want to see in an earlier stage platform company. You don't just want to see revenue growth. You want to eventually see every additional revenue dollar produce disproportionately more profit. And that is finally beginning to happen. Here's another thing that people overlook. Reddit's global daily active uniques increased 18% to approximately 130 million, but average revenue per unique increased 36% to 6.18. So let's think about what that tells us. Users grew by 18%. Revenue grew by 61%. ARPU, or average revenue per user, grew by 36%. ARPU, in my opinion, is one of the most important metrics for these companies. Reddit doesn't just need its audience to grow 50 or 60% every year for the business to continue to grow quickly. It can monetize the audience that it already has much better. And I think that may be the biggest misunderstanding in the Reddit thesis. People look at Reddit like just another social network, but I don't. I think Reddit is closer to a combination of a social network, a search engine, a recommendation engine, and one of the largest databases of human opinion ever assembled. when I'm thinking about buying something, when I'm trying to figure something out, when I'm troubleshooting something obscure or looking for an opinion and I can't seem to find it anywhere, the answer is always almost on Reddit. And if it's not, you just ask and you almost always get it. And I've used this for so many things. I can either search the question and just add Reddit in the Google bar. AI uses Reddit, or I can go into Reddit myself if I can't find someone and figure out the answer. And this matters more and more in an internet increasingly filled with AI generated content. And ironically, I actually think AI could make Reddit's underlying content even more valuable and not less valuable, which is some people's fears. AI can generate an answer, but where does the underlying knowledge come from? AI cannot do, and they don't have the experience of doing. And the people on Reddit are human, so they have the experience of doing. So sometimes even when you get the answer from AI, it's not exactly the same as troubleshooting because you'll run into little things and you have to keep going back. It is so helpful for humans to talk to other humans who have had experience with the same particular situation, whether it's medical, software, fashion advice, whatever. It has decades of those conversations, like so much content. The company's investor materials say Reddit now contains more than 25 billion posts and comments across more than 100,000 active communities. That's wild. That data set has a lot of value to users, and it has a lot of value to advertisers. It has value to search engines, and it has value to AI companies. So many groups of people have value added because of Reddit. Which brings us to data licensing. I think this part of Reddit is fascinating, but I want to be careful with it because I don't think investors should build an entire thesis around massive hypothetical AI licensing data. Reddit currently makes the overwhelming majority of its money from advertising, and that is important. And it's actually advertising that makes me super bullish. In Q2, advertising generated $762 million of Reddit's $805 million total revenue. So that's crazy. Everything else combined was only $43 million. So AI licensing is not what the business is today. And actually, when people get nervous about what if they lose that, it's like it's a drop in the bucket of their revenue. The advertising business is the majority. That's what I want to push out here. It's the majority of where their money's coming from. But licensing could become a very high margin additional revenue stream, but it might not. It's one of those things like we don't know which way it's going to go yet. Reddit already has agreements involving access to its content, including relationships with major AI companies, and it could help expand their revenue. This is why I think that investors might be looking at the AI issue a little bit backwards. The bear argument says, what if people get answers from AI instead of going into Reddit? And that's actually a very legitimate bear case. But the bull argument says, what if AI systems increasingly need Reddit because Reddit contains something that AI cannot manufacture on its own? Like, what if AI needs humans as much as humans need AI? It doesn't have authentic, continuously updated human experience, and that's the asset that Reddit has. And Reddit owns the platform where the asset is being created every single day and has been being created for a very long time. So now let's talk about advertising, because I actually think this could be one of the biggest parts of the story and one of my biggest bullish thesis, as I just said earlier. Reddit's advertising platform historically was not that good compared with Meta and Google's. And if you guys have been on Reddit, you guys know that. And that does sound bearish, but I think things are changing, because it means that there's like an enormous amount of low-hanging fruit and easy for them to turn around. Meta has spent years perfecting their targeting ads. Like, we know that Meta's ads are amazing to the point where they don't even feel intrusive anymore. But Reddit hasn't mastered this, but it is improving. And so that is pretty amazing. Reddit said advertiser growth was roughly 70% year over year in Q2, with strong growth for mid-market companies and small and medium businesses and international advertisers. The company has also been adding AI-assisted ad tools that can help businesses. You can see that they're working on getting their ads better. And you can already see monetization growing much faster than the user base, because that's in the numbers. And this is where I think Reddit could surprise people over the next several years. You don't necessarily need to add another 500 million daily users. You just need to make the existing users worth more. And Reddit has a huge gap internationally. In Q2, US average revenue per user was about 11.85. Internationally, it was just $2.26. So you can see that gap is pretty wide. And normally when I see a monetization gap like this, I don't automatically see a problem. Sometimes can see a runway depending on the specific company. International daily users did grow 28% year over year compared to just 6% in the United States. So that kind of lines up with my theory that we can make the ARPU internationally a lot better. And international revenue did already grow 84%. So if Reddit can continue growing its international audience and gradually close even part of that monetization gap, the financial impact could be significant. Reddit has another audience that I think is underappreciated. Weekly active users reached 514.6 million just this quarter, and daily active users were 130.3 million. There are hundreds of millions of people already touching Reddit on a regular daily use. Turning more of those weekly users into daily users, which is potentially much easier than acquiring someone who's never actually used the app before. Now I just want to touch on the balance sheet because this is another reason I'm comfortable being long Reddit and having it be a pretty heavily weighted position in the portfolio. As of the end of June, Reddit had approximately $2.8 billion in cash and cash equivalents and marketable securities. Company has a $500 million revolving credit facility, but essentially all of it remained available at the end of the quarter, meaning Reddit was not relying on drawn bank debt to fund its business. And Reddit authorized a 1 billion share repurchase program earlier this year. And if they can get their own stock for cheap, that's pretty amazing for investors. It bought approximately 1.5 million during Q2 for about 235 million at an average price of $157. There's still about 760 million remaining in that authorization at the end of June. And that's important because Reddit does have meaningful stock-based compensation. Eek, that I don't like. So I don't want to pretend that dilution doesn't exist, and I hate these companies that they do this. They all do this now, and it drives me crazy. Stock-based compensation was about 107 million in Q2, but the company is now producing enough cash that it can begin to offset that dilution while still maintaining a very strong balance sheet. Then we can look at the next quarter guidance, which is also important. For Q3, management expects revenue of 860 million to 870 million and adjusted EBITDA of 385 million to 395 million. Last year, Q3's revenue was 585 million, so there's quite a difference. Even after 8 straight consecutive quarters of 60% revenue growth, Reddit is still guiding for another quarter of extremely strong growth. So why isn't this stock universally loved? Like, why isn't everyone bullish? Why are there such a divide on the bulls and the bears when it comes to Reddit? This is because we need to talk about the real risk, and the real risk is Google. More specifically, Reddit's dependence upon an external search engine. Reddit's US daily active users growth slowed to just 6% in Q2, and US users were essentially flat sequentially. Management has specifically acknowledged that the changes in third-party search algorithms hurt the traffic during this quarter. And this is a bear case that I have to take seriously. Because if Google continues answering more questions directly with AI overviews, fewer people may click through the websites, and fewer eyeballs means fewer advertisers. That potentially hurts Reddit's logged out traffic. Because if fewer people reach Reddit through search, you could eventually get slower growth. And like I said, fewer advertising impressions. Advertisers don't want to go there. They want to go where the eyeballs are. And advertising is its big revenue maker. So this is absolutely worth watching. But here's what hasn't changed my thesis, at least not yet. Despite those search headwinds, revenue grew 61%. Advertising grew 64%. ARPU grew 36%. Free cash flow more than doubled. EBITDA more than doubled. And management guided the next quarter above what Wall Street was expecting. So right now we have a situation where the thing investors are afraid of is showing up in one metric, external user traffic, but it hasn't shown up in the economics of the business. Now it could just be that it's lagging, so you do got to keep a close eye on this because maybe eventually it does, and that's why I'm having to watch it. But I am not going to ignore the exceptional financial performance because one traffic metric wasn't perfect. And there's an interesting second order possibility here. If Reddit becomes better at converting Google users into actual Reddit users, app users, or logged in users, then losing some low value search might matter less than investors actually think. Management has said direct and app users are substantially more valuable than the casual search visitors anyways, and the company is focused on converting those visitors into more engaged users. And that's just one piece I want to watch over the next several quarters. So now let's bring it back full circle to the S&P 500 inclusion, because that is the headline as of late. And I view the inclusion as validation. Reddit IPO'd in 2024, and 2 years later, this company is profitable and it's like killing it on every single metric, every single financial metric, producing meaningful free cash flow, and now entering the S&P 500. And that's pretty dramatic transformation for what was just a meme stock. But I don't think buying this company simply because passive funds have to invest in it is a very good strategy. In fact, historically, stocks added to the S&P 500 often get a bump after the announcement inclusion, and then they give some of that bump back. So if Reddit moves sharply because of the index flows, that's like really great, but that's not what's going to determine whether I hold the stock and own this company. I want to own this company I'll probably own this company for a few years. I'm not sure exactly when I sell. I'll keep watching it. Right now, I'd probably sell if it hit 300, but numbers change as new earnings come out. Reddit has had an enormous and extremely difficult to replicate archive of human conversation. So I'm not afraid it's going to go away anytime soon. Its advertising business is improving really rapidly. International monetization remains dramatically underdeveloped. The business has extraordinary gross margins, like I said, 91%, and is beginning to show serious operating leverage. And AI could simultaneously threaten Reddit's referral traffic while making Reddit's underlying data more valuable. The last one is the part I find most interesting. Most companies are either AI winners or AI losers, and Reddit might actually be both, because AI could disrupt the way users arrive at Reddit, but the explosion of machine-generated content may also make verified, constantly refreshed human conversations substantially more valuable. And if that happens, Reddit owns one of the best collections of it on the entire internet. So am I still bullish Reddit? I think you can all figure it out. I absolutely am. Do I think the S&P inclusion is bullish? Obviously. Could the roughly 13% short interest combined with index buying create some wild trading? Definitely possible, but none of those things are why I ultimately own the company, because I owned it long before, well, not long before this, I owned it on that big dip a few quarters ago. I like Reddit because I think this is a business doing more than 800 million in quarterly revenue, growing above 60% with 90% gross margins, and a growing advertising platform, more than 500 million weekly users, billions of dollars in cash, and one of the most unique data sets on the entire internet. And I personally don't think Wall Street and the market has completely figured out that combination is super valuable, nor what it's worth yet. The number I'm watching isn't necessarily the stock price. I'm going to be watching the revenue, the gross margins, the users, the international ARPU. I'm going to be watching all of it. And I'm obviously watching what happens with Reddit's AI and data licensing relationships as well. If those continue moving in the right direction, the S&P 500 inclusion may eventually look like one of the less interesting things that ever happened to Reddit in 2026. And that is pretty much my Reddit thesis in about a 10-minute nutshell. Are you long? Are you bullish? Are you bearish? Leave your thoughts in the comments and like and subscribe for more.